Good morning, good afternoon, and good night, wherever you're tuning in. We are Slava and Jonathan, bringing you the Side Quest podcast, where we talk about character development, stories, and all things that are world building. And we occasionally take side quests, because, frankly, that's how conversations work. Just as a reminder, this whole show is spoiler heavy. So sit back, tune in, and join us on this episode of Side Quest. Well, Slava, we're back.
We are back. And where are we?
On Nalthis, looking at Warbreaker, Part 2. Great episode for the first one, where we talked about the prologue pretty in-depth. We talked about Sanderson as a writer, and we ended with his laws of magic. We also touched on Ciri, Vivenna, characters, things that stood out in Warbreaker. Overall, really great episode. Much better than the first 2 times we tried to record this.
So much better. Wow. Yeah, that was an abomination.
That was an attempt. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was, so for those who are new here, we actually used Warbreaker as the intro book to start SideQuest on as a podcast. We tried to fit everything into a single episode, realized we couldn't, re-recorded it as a longer one episode, didn't work. Then we read Name of the Wind. That went a little better, and we said, you know what, let's start with some short stories. Let's figure this out a little slower. And so we committed to doing, if you check out episodes 1 through 5, those are all short stories where we discuss a author's stories. And we threw Poe in there, even though he's more of a poet with his stories, because we were trying things. Well, we had an idea of what this podcast wanted to be. With every creative endeavor, oftentimes it is a fumble around in the darkness to figure out what is actually being made, which is fun. So, Slava, why don't you give us a quick rundown again of the plot? But before you do, make sure you adventurers smash that subscribe button so you never miss a side quest.
In the world of Warbreaker, each person is born endowed with the power of one breath, which can be sold and collected by others, then used to awaken objects, even corpses, to do their bidding. A few individuals who die in glory return as gods, with the power of 1,000 breaths, but no memory of their mortal lives. And they are enthroned in the court of gods in Halandron's capital. To Vivenna and Ciri, the princesses of Idris, the abuse of breath and the claim of the return to be gods are repugnant blasphemy. But with one princess wed to the god king of their nation's enemies in a bid for peace, the other finds she must rely on breath-using mercenaries to try to rescue her sister from her monstrous husband, or so she thinks. So, the first episode, you guys got the scene, 2 kingdoms, 2 princesses. One of them is supposed to wed the god king, but the one that's supposed to wed the god king gets left behind because daddy decides the middle child, who he loves less, which he almost blatantly says that word for word, gets to go and be a vessel for the god king. And by vessel,
fun,
they mean that she's going to bear him a son. So where we jump in is I broke up these discussions by chapters, which are really not going as in-depth as we did with other books, chapter by chapter. But what guides our conversation is chapters 1 through 30 and the prologue for the first episode, and 31 through 58 and the epilogue for the second episode. And at this point in the story, we find ourselves in the slums, and Vivenna is trying to alter the course of the war, or so she thinks.
That's not what I thought you were going to say. I thought you were going to rag on her again. Please keep going.
No, I'm not going to rag on her. I already stated my my displeasure, and we're done with that because I don't want it's not a good gag.
It's not a good gag. It's just your opinion.
Yeah, although she gets gagged when she gets kidnapped.
That's true.
Yeah, that's true. But it really is not a good gag. It played out when it needed to, and we're done. So Vivenna is working with mercenaries now, who she thinks are mercenaries. Well, they are mercenaries who she thinks are her friends, but really are not her friends. She was endowed with some breath by an Indrian who came to the city to also disrupt the war, seek out information on the king's behalf. And she is attacked by 3 lifeless, but another lifeless saves her. And now she needs to kind of rethink her position on things. And this is going to be the arc for Vivenna, where she's going to have to come to terms that what she thinks she knows amounts to no more than book knowledge, some of which is not even true about the city of Halandren or their magic system or their religion.
Yeah, it's fun to see the unique world building that Sanderson introduces us to, where it's like, okay, this princess got trained for 22 years, and now we're seeing that training put into process and acted on. And it's like you said, just book knowledge, which surprises me because if she's gonna go be betrothed to this person, you'd think they would have taken a few field trips to Halandren before she went there to be given away, to go, hey, it's going to be hard, a little exposure therapy maybe. No. They're just hauled up in the mountains, protected themselves like Minas Tirith and the Riders of Rohan, where they're like, no, we're good. We're good. We don't need to get involved. It's like, if you don't get involved, you're going to die also.
Right.
Period. Hard stop. Of course, then Vivenna tries to undo the war that she started. So there's that.
Yeah, because she goes there to prevent a war, ends up working with the mercenaries who are actually working to accelerate the war, helps them accelerate the war, and then works really hard to stop the war, which she fails at. One point I want to make here is that book knowledge, seeing how Vivenna acts on the streets of Halandren, gives me the impression, I'm convinced, she wouldn't have made it in the court of gods.
Right.
Because she is so... I'm gonna keep using this word starchy because that's what Ciri uses in the book, and I think that's a perfect way of describing her. She is so starchy and beholden to these false beliefs that she would have screwed up more in the court of gods and wouldn't have been able to swim in these waters that Ciri somehow, with no training, was able to swim well. So for Vivenna, this is the perfect learning experience. She's thrown into a world that she has a particular view of, and she slowly learns she doesn't know anything. And that's good. That's good for her. Because she thinks Denth and Tonfa and Jules are her friends. They're not. She thinks all lifeless are godless abominations.
1 second.
And they might be.
So this just came to me. If Vivenna thinks that Denth and Tonkfa and Jules are her friends, she didn't have any friends.
Fair enough. Right.
Sorry. Keep going.
No. That's perfect. And she thinks that lifeless are these godless abominations. And maybe they are. But she has to be confronted that some lifeless, even though they may be the product of abuse of a magic system or abuse of power, maybe they are that more than they are abominations. Let's go with that. They're the result of an abuse of power, but yet Claude saves her. And so she has to rethink a lot of her presuppositions, and that's what makes her character arc good. This is good for her in the sense that this is the lesson she needs to learn. Because when she's with Vasher later on, she's like, well, I thought death was my friend, and I don't know. But as she begins to observe the world around her, she takes in the information and begins to process it in a way that leads her to make better conclusions, leads her to rethink her ways and goes, okay, well, when Denth was doing this and doing that and lying to me and making these jokes and taking me to see particular people to undermine, or so she thinks, the war, he was obviously doing the opposite. And I'm looking at how Vasher is acting. This is me talking to Vivenna. I'm looking at how Vasher's doing things. It seems quite the opposite of what Denth is doing. And therefore, she begins to understand that I am totally screwed up. I need to reevaluate how I do things. That's how she grows.
Let me just say something about Vivenna, which is twice she's basically kidnapped, right? The first time she didn't know she was kidnapped. And I really liked this plot device because I don't know of another book that, and I haven't read every book. Fine, whatever. I don't know of another book where they use this plot device of, hey, I'm kidnapping this character by letting her think that she's free, which is very unique. And then the second time, which was actually the first time that she was kidnapped, in our opinion, as readers, she was kidnapped by Vasher in a more normal way. And I think that he threw that in specifically to show us the contrast.
No, I think so too. That was a great plot twist because despite how weird they are,
the characters,
Denth and Tanfa, Denth and Tanfa, the reveal that they are actually the bad guys was well orchestrated. It also sets up the character of Vivenna to learn a lesson, to be rudely awakened, no pun intended.
I was going to say, is that a pun?
To the reality of what she finds herself in. But I think this is a perfect segue into talking about awakening, because we touched on the magic system and the rules of magic and Sanderson's rules for writing magic in the last episode. So if we just run down this road a little bit, do the side quest on awakening.
So the plant's called Nalthis. Briefly mentioned that earlier. On Nalthis, the magic system is called Awakening. And Awakening has, as far as we know, 10 levels called heightenings. And at each of these levels, there's a specific breath count needed to reach each level, and then each level has specific abilities that are granted from it. Ones that we see in the second half of the book with Vivenna is Vasher specifically calls her out saying, I believe you have at least the third heightening if I'm reading your breaths right. Because when she's...
Your biochroma, right?
Yeah, biochromatic breath. Because when she's rescued by Vasher and we find out that he's not the bad guy that we thought he was, and he doesn't tie her up, and she's like, did you rape me? And he goes, no, I paid the... And I love how grumpy he is. No, I paid the hotel lady to wash you, bathe you, clean you, whatever. And she feels sick, and she eats his food when he steps toward the door, and then he gets her the wool shawl that she had stolen from the garbage that she had put her breaths in, but and this is one of the beautiful things about learning magic systems as you go, is she's like, I don't know how to get my breaths back, because she put them all into this shawl, then they're just sitting there. And we learn you can't take someone else's collection of breaths when they put it into something, which is a really great setup for a few things. First off, Nightblood has been made with breaths by Shishara. And then at the end of the book, we also see the statues come alive, who were made by Vasher himself, also known as Warbreaker, the title of the book. So, because they're made by him, he can take those back if he wants to. It seems to me that Vasher has a collection of biochromatic entities scattered around Nalthis that he has created because he was a scholar, which, when the book Nightblood comes out, whenever that is, could be interesting as a plot device that Sanderson uses at some point if Vasher needs breaths. But we know that he has discovered ways to not need to take them back, even though he's a returned, which is also another interesting thing that we find out in the plot near the end. That's kind of a roundabout way to talk about heightenings, so let me pull back a little bit. One of the reasons I love this magic system is the sheer uniqueness of it. It's not your classic Dungeons and Dragons spell casting whatever, and this is honestly why I love Sanderson as a whole, and I'm sure I've said this a million times. It's so unique. I don't know another magic system that's unique like this. I think it had an interesting magic system, if I can call it that, but it was less explained and more imagination based. And this one is more tangible within the world itself, and we see it in use, and we see its failures and successes and the questions. And this is the beautiful part, and why it feels like the world is alive, is the people in the world don't even know all the things. And I think that that's what a lot of fantasy books get wrong is they presume that the characters know all that there is to know about the magic system, which then leaves the readers without any questions. They give you all the information in a sort of dictionary or encyclopedia type way, and they don't leave any questions regarding the magic system. So there's never anything to look forward to. As the reader, you're just like, oh, well, main character casts spells through their hand, and it requires a talking component. Therefore, this situation that they're in, when they're gagged, they can't use magic because they can't talk. And then suddenly someone else bursts in with the magic system still and doesn't use words or whatever. They use a wand, let's say, and it's just like, okay, fine. But this one tries to address, with little hints here and there, that like, okay, Var, in the prologue, Var is chained in a specific way. And if you can look this up real quick while I'm finishing this thought of how Var is chained to rediscuss the restraints used specifically for people who have more than enough breaths that they are seen as awakeners, people who have enough breaths to use them in objects, which near the end of Warbreaker, Vasher gives us a scholar's view, joke intended, a scholar's view of the different types of biochromatic entities. I'm going to say them, and then you can read off to us the restraints that we had with Var. We could talk more about awakening. The first type of, well, let me backtrack a second. I realized after the second episode, or the first episode we did, that one of the reasons that we see so much of the magic system in the prologue is we see 3 of the 4 types of biochromatic entities within the prologue. So we see type 1 biochromatic entities, which is returned, because Warbreakers are returned, Vashers are returned, which we don't find out till the end. We see a type 3 biochromatic entity, which is a biochromatic manifestation in an organic host removed from being alive. So Vasher uses hay to help him go get the keys. Fetch keys is what he says. And then we see biochromatic entities 4, which is a sentient object made by awakening in organic materials like metal or stone, which we see through Nightblood. So we see Nightblood, which is a type 4, Vasher, which is a type 1, and Vasher's quick creation, both with his clothes and the little thing, the hay person that he uses to fetch keys, which is a type 3. The only one we don't see is the Lifeless, and it's interesting, and he doesn't go into this very much, but Awakeners are not types of biochromatic entities. They simply have biochromatic breath. So back to you for the restraints that the restraints that Var had to prevent him from using his power.
Vasher escapes his cell.
Yep.
Then he goes down deeper into the dungeon.
Yep.
So this man was hidden deep in the dungeon. The color was taken out.
Drained
out of everything around him.
Yep.
And here's the quote from the book. A man hung by his arms from the ceiling, naked and chained.
Mm-hmm.
His color was vibrant to Vasher's eyes, his skin a pure tan, his bruises brilliant splashes of blue and violet. The man was gagged. Another precaution. In order to awaken, the man would need 3 things: breath, color, and a command. The harmonics and the hues, some called it. The iridescent tones, the relationship between color and sound. A command had to be spoken clearly and firmly in the awakener's native language. Any stuttering, sorry, Bill, any mispronunciation would invalidate awakening. The breath would be drawn out, but the object would be unable to act. So he's naked, so he doesn't have any cloth or anything to awaken. He is gagged, so he can't speak, and he's hanging from the ceiling, so he can't do any funny business like maybe try to get to an object that he can awaken or get the gag out of his mouth.
And there's no color. Can you read the three elements again real quick? Just the elements required for awakening.
In order to awaken, the man would need 3 things: breath, color, and a command.
Mm-hmm. So in the prologue, we're given a broad stroke framework of how people understand how this system works. Breath, color, which is a burned resource because it's drained, and a command. which is why Halandrin, and it should seem obvious, but I'll say it anyway, which is why Halandrins have so much vibrant color, because they allow awakeners, and so awakeners can simply tap into whatever colors around them, because things become gray after they use awakening. If I were to expound on the logic within the world, it would seem almost like stealing if you awakened and the color was taken from someone else's being or clothing or shop or whatever, because they also never address how color is returned. So if you were to be naked and then next to a shop owner's door, and then you pull off an awakening, and then the color drains from their door, like, they should be upset about that because you stole color from them. Now, granted, awakeners are powerful, so maybe they don't have any recourse, but I'm just expounding on awakening itself at the moment.
That's fantastic. It goes back to what we've repeated numerous times in previous episode and now in this one. You're given just enough to understand, but it leaves you with questions. You're like, oh, I get this. This is fantastic. Wait, now what? But not in any way that confuses you.
Right.
But tell me about the 4 types of biochromatic entities. You mentioned that briefly before. What are they? Vasher the Scholar to Jonathan the Scholar. Let us know about it.
So, at the end of the book, Vasher reviews, and also in chapter 46, he briefly goes over this. There's 4 types of entities, and similar to the laws of magic, I'll just read them all through slowly, and then you'll have them as a reference point. So, type 1 of biochromatic entities are the returned. These beings, these humans who've died and have come back. Small caveat here, we never hear about animals being returned. That is maybe possible. We don't know. I'm sure that there's someone else who's read everything a little more closely who could probably speak to that, but I don't think that that is addressed. I believe the way that is described, I was looking for it earlier but couldn't find it, in chapter 46 where Vasher explains it. But biochromatic entities type 1 are the returned. So the gods in the god courts, Vasher himself. Type 2s would be like Claude and the lifeless armies, which are mindless manifestations in a deceased host. Now, something about this that's interesting that Denth talks about is if you buy a more skilled host, that skilled host gets its skills, or its skills are retained, which is why Claude was more expensive, and they repair Claude because he was Arsteel previously, from our understanding, and he had great sword skills. So it's not just spending one breath to keep him after he died, it's keeping someone who's trained in the sword years and years and years, and then being able to use that lifeless as you need to in whatever ways you need to. Type 3 of biochromatic entities is a biochromatic manifestation in an organic host removed from being alive. And I think that there's a clear distinction here because it's organic host removed from being alive. And I think that that's very clear because I think that there's the opportunity for Sanderson to come back and say there's a type 5 of biochromatic manifestations. Well, no, because, sorry, verbally processing this. A deceased host would be 2, so the squirrel would be 2, I guess. And then type 4 entities would be like Nightblood, which is stones and metals, or Kalad's phantoms, which are the statues that are protecting the city that people hang clothes on and hang whatever on, because what Vasher and Shishara did is they took bones and they put them in metal and stone to create the statues to be animate and to take commands while still being encased in something that is pretty difficult to destroy. Those are the 4 types of biochromatic entities that Vasher covers. And Vasher also knows that we don't know enough. So that's interesting. And we also see later that Vasher knows enough in his research to give away some breath, but he tells Vivenna to stay far away because he whispers to the little girl, the Ponkal's daughter that he rescues, to help her get over the traumatic shock that she was in.
Right. Yeah. See, it's so complex. It's such a fun world. What's really fun is that damn squirrel, dude.
Oh, Light Song. Rip.
Yeah. That squirrel that Vasher awakens, that when he says go cause havoc,
Yep.
I'm paraphrasing. I think it says in the book that the squirrel started screaming
Yes.
like in an inhuman, like demonic way. So this squirrel just went completely apeshit
Yes.
in the palace of what's her name?
Mercy Star?
Mercy Star, thank you.
Or was it all? I don't know. Actually, I think it was All Mother.
Well, both. Lightsong sent her into All Mother's palace, but Vasher used the squirrel and Mercy Star's palace to create a distraction so he can find the trap door.
Right. I'm confusing them. Yeah. So let's talk about Lightsong for a second, and the Court of Gods, because we haven't
Love me some Lightsong.
We haven't talked about these characters yet. So lead us into discussion on this one, Slava, and then also weave us back into the story here, because we've kind of just dismissed the plot to talk about
we
world
really
building.
have, and we promised we wouldn't, and we have. So Lightsong is a returned, and the returned are humans who died
Type 1 entities
in their heroic way.
Yes.
So they died in a heroic way, and they get a choice between this world and the next to come back as gods. So they come back as gods.
Well, as far as we know, they get a choice.
Well, right, because Lightsong tells us that he got a choice. Somebody asked him, hey, you want to return? And Lightsong returned when he's telling his story. I think it's when he's in prison. And so he returns because he saved his niece from drowning and died in the process. And he was a scribe. And he returns as a god. And now his duty as a god is to listen to petitions, bestow blessings, and via his priests make decisions for Hallandren. And then at some point, when a petition either strikes their fancy or compels them as gods who are merciful and, are supposed to die for their people,
supposedly merciful,
to give their breaths up to heal a person, save a person, etc. a person. And Lightsong...
Let me just interrupt 1 second here, because we didn't cover this. Returned have the ability with their one breath, quote unquote, to give it to someone to perform a miracle or a healing or something. And then they die.
So as a returned, Lightsong appears to be the ideal specimen of beauty. He's Lightsong the Bold.
I think of Brad Pitt in Troy when he's just super ripped, fun, attractive, like charismatic. Like that's what I picture for Lightsong.
That's fair. I didn't try to picture him on clothes, but okay.
No, just me, huh? All right. More of a Blushweaver kind of guy, huh?
Blushweaver.
Gotcha.
I like Blushweaver.
Yeah, I bet you do.
But I don't like her at the same time. She gets duped. She's witty. I like witty people. I like people you could banter with.
She's conniving and cunning.
She's also those things, but she thinks she's doing the right thing. So I give her a pass on that because she uses her cunning to do what she thinks is right. And that's not necessarily...
I challenge that because Vivenna thought she was doing what's right. Den thought he was doing what's right.
Well, can I
No,
finish?
You can't finish. I'm here to interrupt you.
That doesn't mean, I was going to say, that what she's doing is actually right, but I give her a little pass because she was trying to save her people. And that's why I give Vivenna a pass with Denth and Tong Fa, even though I don't like her character, like not the literary term, but like the way she does things. But I understand why Vivenna is doing... I keep going back and forth on the pronunciation. Goodness.
Whatever.
I understand why Vivenna is doing what she's doing. I'm like, oh, that's dumb. Don't try to undermine the war. Of course she's going to try to undermine the war. So Blushweaver is not the best character, not the most likable character, but she's funny. Well, the witty part of her I like, and I get why she's doing what she's doing. And if you want, I'll concede to this. She gets her just desserts.
Just desserts? Is that a euphemism or?
Is it that? How do you say it? Like, what's the adage?
She
gets what she deserves? It doesn't matter.
She gets what she deserves. It could have froze again, but I heard just desserts, and I was like, well, Lightsong eats a lot of grapes. Sorry, keep going.
Whatever. We don't have to spend a lot of time on a Blushweaver.
Let's focus on the adage. Let's just talk about that for the next 30 minutes.
Yeah, let's do that. Part 2, the bonus episode of just desserts.
We talk about adages.
How to properly use them in English.
Adages, appendages, and why Blushweaver was not the most attractive God King lady.
No, she was. I mean, she was attractive, apparently, but she wasn't attractive as a person. So,
No.
whatever. I might be just off base here, but I think Blushweaver does what she does, and we'll go with that. But Light Song, I really, really like. Siri and Light Song, my faves.
Can I pause you for just 1 second? I have a thought, and I just want to say it, and we can move on to Light Song, because I really do want to talk about Light Song. But Blushweaver feels like a flat character when you kind of pull her out, because she's very shallow and she has sex with everybody, and like she's trying to seduce and be conniving, whatever. But the reason she doesn't feel flat, which I realize is counter to what I just said a moment ago, is because she has a goal.
Mm-hmm.
And so even though a character might be one-dimensional, perceivably one-dimensional, if they have a goal, you don't pay attention because they have a goal. Anyway, back to Light Song. Just a thought I had.
Yeah. No, good thought. Light Song doubts his own divinity and deliberately
Love
tries
that.
to undermine
Love that. Okay.
deliberately tries to undermine his own image. He frequently is self-deprecating, calling himself useless and redundant. He acts apathetic and lazy, and shows little to no interest in the debates between the priests regarding the governance of Halandran. But despite all this, I think Light Song has a good-hearted nature, especially when he calls his priest Scoot.
Scoot. Oh,
I love Scoot.
the other thing is, I love when he tries to create heresies within the religion. I wish that
Yes.
was explored a little more, because that's just really funny.
Hold on. Give me 2
You got a
seconds.
quote that you really like?
Oh, I got a quote that I really like. I died at this quote. It's so hilarious. Let me open up a Kindle app.
While you're doing that, let's talk about Scoot for a second. When we find out that Scoot was related to
Dude.
Light Song, that's really
Brothers.
that's really touching, right? Like, and how patient he is
Yes.
with him, and how irreverent and rude. Well, I don't think he's rude. I think he's purposefully
Irreverent.
provoking to Scoot.
Remind you of anybody you know?
Me. It's me.
Oh.
Oh, you wanted me to say you.
Never mind.
No, calm down, Vivenna. You haven't understand the world yet.
So, Life Blesser is another god, and they're talking.
Mm-hmm.
Light Song, Life Blesser said, with his tactlessly honest voice, "You really need to take more of an interest in politics. It can be very diverting. Why, if you only knew the secrets to which I'm privy." "My dear Life Blesser," Light Song replied, "please trust me when I say that I have no desire to know any secrets which involve you and a privy." I snorted in the bus. As the audience knows, I listened to these things in the bus, and I lolled out loud, as the kids say. And I snorted. When I laughed, I snorted. I was like, ah!
Writing these characters has to be just the most fun, where they're like, I get to make fun of my other characters right now.
But the next line is even better. Life Blesser frowned, obviously trying to work through that one. Dead. Absolutely dead. It was great. I love Light Song. Light Song is the greatest.
Ugh.
I even like him more than Siri, if we're going to be honest. He makes the book for me. As much as I enjoy Siri, the character,
he's a great
because
contract.
of the arc and because I identify with Siri because of her experiences as a young person, Light Song is just the greatest thing that Warbreaker has to offer. He's so
Here's the
so
cast,
funny.
Right? We have the grumpy mercenaries, we have the ignorant princesses, we have the contrast of culture, and then we have a god who doesn't believe in his own divinity. It's just such a wonderful tasting menu, to quote you, of literature. It's really great.
Yeah.
I love it so much. Anyway, keep us going on the plot here.
We're halfway through the book, even more. We have Siri, who's making friends with the God King. She realizes that he is a pawn in a game that's bigger than both of them. Vivenna is out on the streets because she's been betrayed by Denth and Tangfa, and her friend has been killed. She realizes that Tangfa is a psychopath, and she is hiding on the streets from them. Vasher saves her. So that's that cast of characters. But what's more interesting, because we spend enough time on them, is what's going on in the Court of Gods. I know you want to talk about this, so I'll set this up for you. Blushweaver and her machinations, her little conniving games that she's playing with Allmother and with Mercy Seat, who is like, I guess, the bimbo of the cast. She's a little just dim-witted, or a little slow and innocent, maybe, or just she seems kid-like because she's easily manipulated by Blushweaver, and she doesn't understand.
You think she's a bimbo? What do you think that word means?
Somebody who's dumb, pretty and dumb.
Hmm.
What do you think the word means?
A whore.
Okay.
Oh, we're doing this. Oh, okay. We're playing dictionary games. Okay. All right. Fine. So, yeah. Blushweaver in her conniving...
An attractive but unintelligent or frivolous young woman.
All right.
Not a whore, comma, Jonathan, in case you're reading this. It's Google says.
Oh, of course. Okay. Well, fine. I'm okay being wrong. I need to send a message to management about the dictionary.
It's an HR complaint.
Who do I email in the government about the dictionary? Hey, dear Library of Congress, I would like to complain about the dictionary. What is this email? Who's this person? Why are they complaining about the word?
My day is ruined and my disappointment is immeasurable.
That's quite the quote. My disappointment is immeasurable. All right. Crazy. So Blushweaver is trying to capture the command phrases for all of the lifeless.
Right.
So that she can make sure that she gets to send the lifeless to war. To your point, she doesn't know that she's being used by the Poncolians. I realize that I just don't have another word to call them, but Poncol, which is one of the reveals here, is been planning, and we see snippets of this because they're such background characters, and then Sanderson's like, hey, actually, it's these people you've seen the whole time, which is always a fun thing to happen in books, right? So Poncol has been trying to retake their authority, and they're using the gods as chess pieces, which is pretty brilliant, because using Manchurian candidates, if you will, which is like you just have a figurehead who doesn't actually have any power, which should have been more obvious to us while we're reading, because they're never allowed to leave the court.
Right.
You know? So even though they have this life of luxury per se, and they can supposedly do whatever they want, they actually can't do whatever they want.
You know what? I'm going to call you out again on your definitions. Manchurian candidate does not mean a figurehead. Manchurian candidate is a person who is not loyal to or who harms their own country or political party because they're under the influence of another. So they're technically a traitor or involved in espionage.
That's kind of how I defined it, though, where Blushweaver harms her own country because of Poncol using her as a figurehead.
If we're talking Blushweaver specifically, then I retract my statement. Then
that's what the Poncolians were doing, is they were using the gods and the priests, because the Poncol were the servants.
Fair.
Outside of Bluefingers, and they were puppet stringing marbles. Don't touch my marbles. Over to you, I guess.
I ruin everything, just like Light Song.
We should change the name of the podcast too.
Slava ruins everything?
Slava ruins everything.
Yeah. You're right. So that reveal, what you just mentioned before I rudely interrupted you, that the Poncolians, which is, I think, a fine way of describing them.
I think it's a good way.
Yeah. Have been running everything, and Trellides is actually not the bad guy, but Bluefingers is the bad guy because he's been, toying with Ciri. The world that is the Court of the Gods is revealed to be a charade for all intended purposes. And Lightsong coming to terms with his divinity, but at the same time, fine, he accepts his divinity, but he realizes that he's a pawn. He's exactly as useless as he is in his own head when he's being self-deprecating and provoking and a little bit of an ass to his priests, he actually turns out to be that, but he also turns out to be a god. I mean, in the world that Sanderson is writing. And I think his death is very noble. He realizes what he must do, and he fulfills his destiny as a god to save his people and cure, if you will, heal Sesebron. Because Sesebron had his tongue cut out as a child, so he couldn't
use awakening.
Awaken anything, use it to save himself, save people, say whatever. Because although we don't get it described, when Lightsong gives him his breath, the tongue comes back, and the next thing he does is goes to save Ciri.
Super Saiyan mode. Yeah.
Yeah. So apparently, whatever happened in the prison, because when they come back to the prison, they, meaning all the characters we've just discussed, they just see bodies everywhere.
I want to unpack that just a little bit, because what we see with Awakening before this moment is there has to be strong intent. You need to know what you want it to do. But this is people who have so much less breath than Sesebron. So they do also make a note in, and I'm sure that Sanderson had to like go back in his revisions and figure this out, was the more breath that you have, the less like intention you need. And there's also a level of heightening. I think it's a 6th level. 6th level is instinctive awakening. So it's just like you instinctually know how to do these things. And so because Sesebron is at least the 9th heightening, probably the 10th, because, and this is where it's a little, I think, gray, because the 10th is said to create color distortion, the 9th is not, and we do see color distortion around Sesebron.
Right.
But in the 10th, it also says it has mental commands. And so cutting his tongue out would not have done anything. And so like this is where the book breaks a little bit, I think. So yeah, the 10th heightening talks about color distortion and perfect invocation and mental commands, which is why it's like, yes, cutting his tongue out would limit him pretty much at any other level. So I feel like he's between 9th and 10th. And the way that Sanderson has shared with us is 9th heightening is about 20,000 breaths. 10th heightening is like 50,000 breaths. So I'm wondering if there's a gradation as you're getting more breaths, because Sesebron said that sometimes he'd get 2 to 3 breaths a week, sometimes 4. And this has been handed down at least through a couple other God Kings. And if they're all getting a couple breaths, now they're being eaten every week, right? So,
or so we think.
Just a note, right?
Sesebron, I think it's alluded, might have an excess of 50,000 breaths, because if he's the 5th God King, they all get their big, powerful God breath. Then they get a breath to 4 a week, sometimes more. So if he has 50,000 breaths, at that point, I think it's safe to assume, given what I know, maybe there's things that I haven't figured out, it's safe to assume that maybe he doesn't need everything that people of a lesser heightening need to awaken or to do any sort of feats that are only possible for the awakened. But if you need to speak a command, I think you still need a tongue. So I think that holds.
Right.
It's not a complete break, but I see why you're calling it a break in the book, but I don't think it's a complete one.
Well, it's mental commands. 10th heightening, if you have 50,000 breaths, mental commands.
Oh, maybe he doesn't know that, because he's been,
But here's the thing. As your power grows, you don't need as much intention to use awakening. And this is the contention point that I'm saying, where it's like, it doesn't matter if you cut out his tongue if he's on the 10th heightening anyway, because he has mental commands. And so what I think needs to happen, this is just something that I've never done for the full research on, because it's just like, I like it, it's fun, I enjoy it, so whatever. Someone else who's smarter than me will do the research on it. I think color distortion and perfect invocation probably could bump down to the 9th, and then mental commands could become up to the 10th, but then the 10th would be like 75,000, or like, you make the 10th a larger thing, or maybe you make an 11th. I don't know.
Yep.
Something like that. Because mental commands means that he should have just been using awakening willy-nilly because he had thoughts.
Right.
And I'm not trying to break this. I want to get back to the
No,
story.
no. So I'll end it with this. He should have been able to use awakening because you're right. People of his heightening level should be able to use mental commands. He was never taught that because his priest had other ulterior motives. But what breaks it is somewhere in the book I remember Vasher saying that the higher your heightening level, the more you know without having to do the research. Some things just come with the
Right.
level up. So that's, I think, where the break is. He should have known. Yes, he wasn't taught it, but he should have known given what level he was at. Anyway, onward and upward we go. I like the way the book ends. Two specific reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to be Ciri and Vivenna. Ciri gets a happy ending. Susebron gets a happy ending.
Mm-hmm.
We'll leave it there.
Which is nice. Happily ever after.
Yep.
Love it.
Yep, great. And we're going to stop there with that because I have no other thoughts on it, honestly. Vivenna realizes that whatever's back in Idris is not for her. Whatever she thought she might have in Halandran, not for her either. And she goes with Vasher to go hopping wherever Vasher goes hopping.
Mm-hmm. To Roshar eventually.
To Roshar, world hopping, yes. Vasher tries to talk her out of it, but he doesn't try that hard.
No, he doesn't.
He's like, maybe you should stay here. No, okay, let's go. And they go off to Roshar, which we find out later in other books. But I like the fact that Vivenna gets her crap together at the end of the book.
Mm-hmm.
She's learned a lot from being thrown into this world. She's learned a lot about being in the streets, by realizing, the differences between who your friends are and who there aren't, intentions of people, reading people better, and then, saving that little girl, which is part of that reveal about Vasher to her, and then seeing Ciri and the God King and realizing the full scope of everything that's going on when Vasher is introduced to Susebron, and Susebron bows before him because Vasher is one of the 5 scholars, and they send these statues that you refer to stop the lifeless, which were sent against Idris, which a plot point we didn't talk about, but they were sent against Idris because everybody voted for the war because they were manipulated by the Pankal priests.
Mm-hmm.
So Idris is kind of left to the side. We get enough information that Susebron will send the army of the statues to stop the lifeless, and we get hope. We get enough information that the statues will be able to stop the lifeless, and everything will be fine, I guess. And that's fine for the story for me. Like, Ciri gets the happy ending, Idris probably will get saved, great. But it ends on this note, which for me is really just fantastic. It's great. Is Vivenna learning the things she needed to learn, and now this is the second arc for her, I'm assuming. She's going to go in a different world, and now she's an awakener. She goes, this is who I am. I was preparing all my life for this thing. I learned that this thing was not at all what I'm built for.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned that I wasn't prepared as I thought I was. I learned that what I know is half of what I knew. Let me put it this way. Half of what I knew wasn't true. And the only friend that she really had, getting back to your point, is Vasher. And Vasher's the only one that showed her like true friendship, even though he's a grumpy old
Curmudgeon.
Dude. Curmudgeon, right? And they go off on their adventure, which leaves the book with that, cliffhanger, if you will. They're like, oh, well, what the hell are they going to do? Where are they going? And I think that's such a fantastic way of ending a book.
Yeah. So, a few interesting notes. The color of the clothing that Vasher gives Vivenna after she realizes she's going to trust him, reluctantly, albeit on the front end, is blue, and that's relevant later. You said she goes off on her second adventure. When we see her again as a different person, that's probably more like her 10th or 12th or 20th adventure, because her next adventure should be Nightblood, which I believe, and we don't know enough about it, but it should be directly following the Warbreaker plot, theoretically. Or it could be a prequel to Warbreaker, not directly like 100 years before, but like whenever the 5 scholars were around. So, I mean, there's just like a lot more to discover here in Nalthis with the Five Scholars, that could be at least one book, right?
I
Discovering
think so.
ichor alcohol, which then made it easier to make lifeless. What happens after in Kuth and Huth with Yeasteel. And yeah, there's just so much more to cover, which is the beautiful thing. Another fun note is one of the paintings that is
Yes.
described. Do you figured you read this?
Yes.
That's boring. Never mind. Don't worry about it.
No. That's not boring. The painting that Lightsong saves, doesn't want burned, shows up in the Way of Kings where Dalinar is looking at it, which is
A figure with 9 shadows.
frickin' just the best thing ever.
How did that painting get there? Who knows?
Indeed. Oh, speaking of things that are interesting, fantastical, and just great story writing, and on the scale of the Cosmere,
Yeah.
is Hoid. We get Hoid. Hoid tells the story of the Many War and the history of Idris and Hollandrin to Ciri, and Hoid's being Hoid. He's a little toned down in this book. Maybe this is
It's actually his first appearance because
he's on his best behavior here.
Sanderson wanted to use him earlier. I don't remember him in Elantris, which is his first published book. But talk a little more about Hoid real quick. I interrupted.
Hoid is a world hopper, and Hoid is also witty. Wink, wink. He is one of my favorites in the Way of Kings. I don't want to end on Hoid and give him too lengthy of a discussion here.
I had to look this up because I couldn't remember. Hoid is in Elantris, so that Warbreaker's not his first incident, but in Elantris he's seen as a beggar. So this is similar to the mythology of Odin, which I'm not saying Sanderson stole this, but it's a common trope to take something from somewhere else. Anyway.
Yeah.
So,
well, one question on Hoid before we end, and maybe we can whet the appetites of the audience to go re-listen to Way of Kings and set them up for our next book that we're going to cover.
Mm-hmm.
What is a Dawn Shard?
I can't with you. You shouldn't know that word yet. That's not a word that you get to know. Forget that word. You don't get to. I'm gonna go complain to Spencer, my other Cosmere spouse.
We're a throuple, Cosmerian throuple here.
You have not been invited yet. You don't know everything.
Oh wow. Well, we'll end on a sad note.
We're gatekeeping on this one.
At least Ciri gets her happy ending. I get to hang out with Vasher, over here.
Yeah. You're more of a Denth in my opinion. Anyway.
Wow. Holy crap.
You're not Tonkfa or Non-Balat.
Okay, well, if you put it that way, yes. Out of those three, I'll take Den. I'm not a psychopath that tortures animals.
Yeah, on either planet.
Right.
On either planet. But yeah, one of the tropes that Hoid reveals himself as is a beggar on Roshar, on Elantris, which I can't remember the name of the planet of Elantris at the moment. It might also be Elantris. I think that's actually the first planet where it's like the planet, the country, and the city are all named Elantris or something like that. Spencer can remind me. But yeah, Sanderson always wanted to drop a character across books. And so he's like, well, I'm going to just kind of slide this in and see if my publisher will let me do this. And I think that Sanderson, when he published his first book, he'd written, I think, 20 novels prior to that.
Oh, wow.
So,
okay.
He'd done the reps. He did the work. Even though you can tell it's his first published novel because it's doesn't have the soft edges, hasn't been refined. It's like, what did Michelangelo's first sculpture look like that he sold, right? Like, it was probably really freaking good still. Like, you and I get a block of marble and like, if you can't do this, we're going to kill you. Like, well, I'll see you in heaven, bud.
Yeah, right.
You and I, we're not, even if we were given a lifetime, it's like we only get one block. It's just not happening. I'll just leave that there. But he gained authority to do this because of his experience, right? And that's how you gain authority. Is one of the ways to gain authority. We don't have to talk about that. That's more like personal development stuff. Is experience, right? Like the first time you lift a weight, similar to gaining the authority to awaken. The first time you do it, you're like, I don't know how to do this. And then you've got someone like Vasher who's like, nah, I've been doing this for hundreds of years. Let me remember how to tell you the basics, right? So.
Yeah. Well, I didn't buy. Nope, I'm lying. I got Elantris because Audible had it for free, so I got it.
Sure. They rotate those titles, so it won't be free forever. Because Cradle was free for me for a while, and then they took it away, and then I had to go buy them, which is fine. Love Will White, but
Right. Okay.
no.
So right now I have it. So maybe I'll.
You have permission to listen to that one because
thank you.
Once you go through it, you'll understand why I said that. It's just like it's not a book that I think we will get to here for a very long time because it's just so clunky. And I'm not trying to dog on my guy here, but it's just really clunky. And you'll understand what I mean when you go through it. So if you want to whet your appetite, do it there.
Sure. Whatever. All right, good people. It has come to that time where we say goodbye to our dear audience. Make sure to come back next week. We will have Spencer and Casey on, and we'll discuss the book from a different perspective, primarily because Casey has never read a Sanderson sentence, much less a book by Sanderson. So thank you for joining us today. Be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on the next literary challenge, only on Side Quest.
May the curtains fall in your colorful favor. Just testing out new endings.
That's good. I like new endings. We should do cold opens and fun endings.
I just have so many questions.